Hey guys, I'm Chris,
And I'm Mike.
and welcome back to this week's No Limits, the Scott Harvath podcast. How you doing this week, Mike?
I'm doing good. This book was a whole lot of fun. Something a little different on the Scott Harvath pod. Yet Scott Harvath just makes a quick cameo here. But I'm still here for it. Had a good time with the Athena girls. What'd you think?
Yeah, two quick cameos to be exact. One was shorter than the other. Yeah, but
True.
yeah, no, I think I remembered reading this novel and liking it. I was kind of confused when the first go around when I was reading the books because I kind of got them from the library and I just saw I didn't realize what this one was, and then I rated it and then I was like, oh, hey, this is cool, nice little one off. And it's interesting to think about how he put out two books this year, right? So it'll be this one and the next one we're going to cover on this podcast, Full Black, right? So to think like Scott or Brad pumping out two novels every year going forward, that would have been crazy.
Oof. I think he wanted a sequel. The way this book wraps up, I haven't read any commentary or listened to any of his interviews, but the way the book wraps up, he was really teeing up another one. And I'm frankly shocked that we don't have it, which might lead into something else I want to talk about tonight with you. I'm a little shocked at some of the reviews of this book. I was generally flipping through your Goodreads, your Amazon. Some people had some not so nice things to say, and you're the numbers guy. I think our numbers are a little lower than we're used to seeing with these books. And so I thought, for a book that I really enjoyed, had a great time with, and a book that I actually would want the sequel to, when he teed it up at the end with the Amalgam, this conspiracy group, I'm like, yeah, let's go. Let's chase them down. Let's get Gretchen and the girls back in the field. And the fact that it hasn't happened, the reviews are kind of mediocre. I want to try to pick apart what people's problem is with this book, because I think I see some things that people would propose as a problem. Yet, in my opinion, there's no reason to criticize this book that much. And I think the critiques are coming from people's. I think it's very external. It's not something related to the book. It's an externality people are bringing with them as the reader, and I find that a little disappointing that this book has lower reviews because it's really an enjoyable story. I mean, honestly, it is.
Yeah, and some of the things I read were, this book is written for adolescent girls, like in the writing style of that manner. The fantasy in this book is so surreal. Why is Brad doing that? He's never done that before. But, and then, the character development was very weak. This is a modern day Charlie's Angels. I would argue a bunch of things. One, I kind of could tell that this was Brad Thor the whole time. It had elements of a Scott Harvath novel, not to mention
absolutely
Scott Harvath present. Even though I listened to it via audiobook, and I have to say, like, what's her name? I had it pulled up. Elizabeth Marvel.
Oh, she's fantastic.
Was really good, and this book was especially hard because not only normally you just have one protagonist with a bunch of side characters. In this case, you have, I guess you could argue that, Casey is your, main female, Gretchen Casey, but you have all the time these four women interacting with each other, and the way she was able to inflect her tone back and forth was pretty fascinating, and I could tell when she was in each character.
Yes,
but to follow up and say that, he's never done fantasy before, like, obviously you haven't read his other novels then.
Because no, it's not true. It's just not true.
I even texted you halfway through, kind of when we were getting to really starting to understand this whole Nazi, because we're going to get to the first chapter, which is like kind of crazy. You're just like dumped in media res with this, female operative, going in Nazi Germany trying to take out this guy. So we're like coming back to why that chapter was important. And I'm like, oh, this is interesting. This is kind of like, what was it? Foreign Influence? No, is it Foreign Influence or The Apostle? What's the one with the like National Treasure style?
I think Foreign Influence, because The Apostle is Afghanistan.
Right. It's Foreign Influence, and then the other one that comes to mind is our favorite book, Blowback. Right?
Yeah. There's
so,
remnants of that. You're right.
but to me, maybe we'll
It's done better here.
it kind of is. I don't know why. Maybe it's because it's not Scott, so it's something different. It's not like I'm conditioned to want some. I'm already conditioned to something new that's happening. So like it's like, all right, it's fine. I don't know. It also was just like it wasn't trying to be too serious with
Correct
with it. You kind of know that like as soon as they mention this, like, all right, well, I don't believe it, so I'm just along for the ride. And also, that whole chapter about conspiracy theories, which was kind of chilling, that I read that the same day that a New York Times article comes out. In my mailbox, I'll get these like, you might like this New York Times article, and it was about the Bronco and about how Denver Airport is a conspiracy theorist's wet dream, essentially. And then I read that article and I was like, I feel like I've listened to that in a Scott Harvath book. And this was before I got to it in the Athena Project. And then later on that day, I got to that. And I was like, oh, it was this book. Like, it was like weird
the same
conspiracy
thing happened
theories.
to me. I was trying to figure it out. I'm like, I feel like I've heard this conspiracy theory before. Like maybe I read somewhere that Mark Zuckerberg lizard person is living under the airport or whatever. I was like, where is this from? And then I remembered I was starting to do a little research on it, and a PBS documentary came up, and it's like a PBS learning lab where it was like a training for teachers on how to do fake news and how to break down conspiracy theories. And they used the Denver airport as the example.
Oh, that's
and so
funny.
I think in one of my teacher trainings, we had gone through this because I'm like, the blue horse with the red eyes and these creepy paintings and like people saying it's the Illuminati headquarters under an airport. I was like, one, this is bizarre. And two, I think I remember hearing about this. So I had a similar thing happen there.
Yeah, some of the things that you look up, and Brad, obviously, everything he writes is true, but whether or not like what happened, what the implications. Yeah. So like the fact that the sculptor died, like his sculpture killed him, like that's true. The fact that they literally built these bunkers and then filled them up because they said they were done wrong, like that's also true. These, and I think is there anything about an airport with ventilation in a Mitrap novel? Not that it's a Denver airport, but I think he like references. There's something like akin to that they also have that at the Denver airport where like you'll just be out in the middle of nowhere and there'll be these like ventilation shafts, like, well, what the hell is that for? One thing I could buy though is the fact that maybe underneath the Denver airport is like some sort of government facility, like I could believe that.
Who knows? Yeah. Continuation of government type of thing. Who knows? But I think the most important point here with all the conspiracy stuff, one, you're right in saying it's Brad Thor being Brad Thor. Anybody who's trying to claim this book is out of the blue, comes out of left field, isn't reading close enough.
Right.
And the second thing I'll say about it being Brad Thor through and through is, boy, are we traveling heavy. I mean, we'll get to it, but we've got the whole list of places to run through. So that's another way it's absolutely a Brad Thor book. And I think once you change your mindset, because I think every Mitch Rapp book I went into wanting to take it seriously, and I think Vince wanted the reader to take it seriously, and his themes were really pertinent, really important, pretty pressing. I think I've learned with Brad Thor, sometimes you just have to go along for the ride. Like, and this book in particular, you got to switch on its Saturday morning cartoon mode, right? This is pajamas, bowl of cereal, just ready to go. And for me, that clicked not only with the conspiracy stuff, but the second we heard about the quantum teleportation and this whole like Angel's Gate, the Angletor that this German scientists were working on, I was like, the second we get into that, some readers might go firebomb this book, on all the review sites, be like, it's so dumb. But to me, the second that was explained and you got like body parts stuck in a concrete wall because of failed Nazi experimentation with quantum teleportation, I'm like, dude, let's go for it. Let's dig in. And I will be the first one to criticize something if I think it's totally dumb, out of place, and it doesn't work. But no, That is not the reading I got. The second I heard that, I was just like, bang, I'm just going to enjoy it. This is a book I'm just going to have fun with. I'm not going to take too seriously. This is not like Mitch Rapp trying to impersonate Saddam Hussein's son to break into a bunker and stop a nuclear attack. Like, no, this is just going to be an adventure story. And it didn't get that out of control wild. Between the Denver conspiracy and this quantum teleportation, it didn't do anything else like so weird that it would make me check out and want to go give it 1 star. So not at all. I didn't have a problem with that. And the last thing, unfortunately, I think some people have a problem with, you mentioned, this is written for, a female audience or something like that, or an adolescent audience. I don't think so at all. I mean, some of the humor between the ladies, and frankly, some of the sex and graphic scenes that Brad is bringing up, I think this is just in his wheelhouse. I think it's his repertoire. He's just applying that humor of operators to a female context. So to me, the only criticism could be maybe someone with experience or a woman author herself could write the perspective of a female team of operators better. And of course, right, the answer to that is yes. Yes, they would, right? Like it would be experiential. It'd be firsthand. It'd be like Jack Carr, writing a story about a SEAL who wants revenge on the government. Like, of course, someone inside of it with firsthand experience would do it better. But I don't think you could take away from what Brad did, because some of the interactions between the ladies are fantastic. And you add his brand of, kind of sexually charged humor into that, and it just is brilliant. It absolutely works for me, and I'm having such a good time with the Athena girls when they're together.
Yeah, and I think, when we got our first taste of them in the last novel, Foreign Influence, right? So I enjoyed them, and I was like, oh, this is where they came in again. And I think so you mentioned the fact that he didn't get a chance to write the sequel, but he teed it up. And I think what we're actually going to find out is that he did tee up, but this is going to be a continuation in full black. So the amalgam is,
okay,
something that I think is going to be a player there. But what I think happens is that, obviously we'll talk about it when we read it, but I think that he decides to drop the Athena team essentially. So I don't want to spoil. There's like a scene, I think, with Scott and maybe one of the players in the beginning of that novel or the next. But yeah,
we do have a little to resolve though with Gretchen, Riley, and Scott. I mean, there's a love triangle, and I'm hoping there's some sort of satisfactory conclusion to that. So
right,
I don't remember.
We finished the last novel with, what was the guy named George, the British guy.
Oh, right. The MI5 guy.
The MI5 guy who's actually working for, whoever were the 2 British people speaking in this club, right? And so I think...
Are they the amalgam?
That's
all connected?
I think that's what's all connected. So that's what I wanted to ask you. Sweet. And maybe this is a better question to ask after we read the next novel, or once we get the conclusion of the amalgam, is, if... let's say someone skips this, how much are they missing? I mean, I guess they're not missing too much, because mainly this is like, the reason Scott is after the Italian guy, what was his name?
Bianchi.
Is because he gave weapons
the last book
to people in Foreign Influence. He plays a, and so...
And the Rome attacks.
Yeah, exactly, the Rome attacks. So essentially this book would be a couple sentence off book chapter.
You're right.
What Scott's doing in between books. And I think that's kind of cool. I like that kind of stuff. There's been a bunch of things in the various series we've read where, especially in like Mitch, where like, it doesn't take it's not like a whole year, but it's like a couple months, and he's been doing something, obviously. And, typically it's related to what the next, plot is going to be. Or they reference like something that they did, like some op that they did. And now we get to see that in this novel. I think that's why I appreciate this, reading these genres, especially like dedicating our outlet to covering, 2 very long series. And we actually can appreciate, some of those downtimes when you're like sort of not nitpicking, but like doing a deep dive into these stories.
I think you're right. That makes me appreciate this one even more than I already had. because that's a really cool balance. You can go from foreign influence to full black, and you're right there with it because of that ending of foreign influence. But if you read this book, you have a little bit more context of what was going on to get them there or to give them some of these leads, but it's not required reading. So I think that's even more impressive, to the way you can merge and balance the universe and then this kind of side quest and not make it feel like a side quest at all. And
Right.
speaking of that, I think you mentioned my favorite sequence in the book. I think it's like chapter 2 or 3,
Yeah,
the
Venice.
Italian op,
Yeah,
the Venice op.
that's really cool. It reminds me of
Holy
like the Italian
smokes.
Job. There's a couple things that
Yes.
remind me of the Italian Job in this novel. There's the Italian scene, and then at the very end, when they're chasing the trucks, and there's like
Mhm.
multiple trucks that they're having. That reminds me of the the Volt at the very end, and then they had to like split up and stuff.
Play the shell game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Dude, but that Italian op, and something else it does, not only is it at the end of the excitement, the link to Scott Harvath, when they take the guy to Scott, and he's kind of their ace in the hole to get out of there, and Scott wants to interrogate Bianchi. So there is that link, but it's also giving us another reason we need the Athena project. Because like in Foreign Influence, thought it was really smart how they had the op in Amsterdam, and they were dancing in the windows, but secretly surveilling the streets of the red light district. We right away see them using their skill set and another set in order to manipulate essentially this millionaire who's hosting this party in Venice, and they're able to isolate him and take him to bed, and that's where they're able to apprehend him. And I thought the whole way it happens, back and forth, he's flirting, they're flirting, going along with it to a certain degree, but then eventually realize he's not giving in as they hoped, so they have to drug him. But by drugging him, it leads to kind of this sequence where his guards are alerted, and they go out the window and he can't swim, and then they're on this boat getting shot at in the Zodiac. Man, that was like Casino Royale. You remember Casino Royale with that building collapsing?
right.
I'm
right.
like, damn, like we've got some Bond stuff, Italian Job, Mission Impossible. Like, it's so cool. And Scott Harvath couldn't have done that job. Like your regular operative couldn't have done it. You needed this group of ladies to be able to sweet talk Bianchi
Right.
to get him
Right.
upstairs.
Right. No, and I also like the scene because we're kind of, yes, we've met them in the last novel, but we kind of just got like the brief little background, and Scott is the main driving character in that. But here we're expected to know who they are, coming in with a little bit of knowledge about them. But then I would argue that we do get a decent amount of character development with them, and it's we're sort of
Yes.
popped in media res with them in this op, and they're quipping with each other. You learn a little bit about each of their individual traits, and that's what's cool about having the 4 protagonists of this group, and each of them are different in their own way. And I feel like Brad does a good job of sort of partitioning that, because obviously in a group there's going to be differences, just like with Scott and like the eventual people he's going to work with on a given op, or the people he has worked on past ops, or Mitch and his squad.
Yep.
Like Scott, Mitch and Scott are very different people, and obviously they built that up. So I think with the amount of time that we have, and like Brad uses enough to give us a good example of who Gretchen is, who Julie is, who Megan is, who Alex is. And so we're actually missing one, right? So we don't see Rodriguez in this novel at all because she's hurt.
She's
in the last
recovering.
one. Right.
Yeah. Man, that was a great scene.
I think the four protagonists work. I don't know like how the 5th, 5 more than that, it's kind of like getting, I don't know. And oftentimes it was 2, like, so it was, even though it was 4, it was like
Right.
split up. So,
Right.
he only had to deal with, which is easy, just to have one-on-one interactions.
Well, they do that a couple of times. So just to point out the other action scenes they're a part of, there's that castle where they're really sent to do more investigative or exploratory work, like chase down some leads, see what's going on with this castle. Their boss, which, by the way, we should give a shout out to Rob Hutton. I really like how he's handled as their leader, their like handler. And he and Gretchen seems, I think, have had some history, but they're adult about it. They kind of very professional. I think he's a really good boss for them. It almost makes me think of that guy who's running Haley Chill,
Right.
and
Yeah. I know
in the
what you're
Chris
talking about.
Howdy series. Though I don't know what conclusions to draw about him. He seems to be a patriot and an upstanding guy, but not sure. But here, Rob Hutton, I think we're really bought into, and that's expressed at the end when the girls toast to him. They're all toasting the op, and they make sure to toast Rob and thank Rob and include him in the little group. So I just really like how that's handled. But they're in the castle. He sends them on that mission, and then Gretchen essentially figures out what's going on here because guys came at us with submachine guns, and we were here with pistols. We were told we're just going through a castle, in old ruins. And he's like, all right, there is more to the story. He reads her into it.
Yeah, and they go down and they see this, horror scene, and they obviously realize like all this Nazi occult stuff. So like, why the hell did you send us to this facility that obviously like you know more than you're leading on, right? So
yeah, 100%. And then they also split up at the very end scene. Was that like a church? I think they're at who's the big bad here?
Obressian.
Yeah, Obressian. His complex, and they also split up there where two are holding the outside, and the other two go inside and find the false wall and go down the staircase. So I think you're right in that they're teamed up pretty well, and that shows Gretchen's leadership, right? She's able to make the call on the op of who and what skill sets are needed where, kind of that divide and conquer idea. And I think that just it's good storytelling, but it also shows Gretchen's leadership on the op.
Yeah, and then obviously they split up here with people taking their roles, and then they split up again when they have to go get that one. I think it's in Serbia, and that's where there's like little mini action scenes. There's some big action scenes. You think you've described them. The very end, and when they're at that castle in, I guess is that in did you write out the traveling
Czech
heavy
Republic.
for us? They're in they're near Prague. Yeah.
Yeah, they're in Czechia. I did my best. I honestly don't know if I got it all. It was just so many. But this list is like early Brad. Like this makes me think of Brad's like first couple of books, the way this is. We open in France. That's the historical scene, the prologue, jumping out of the plane, where that female operative, World War II, is capturing the scientist in the documents who's working on the research. Paraguay, because there's a whole nother side plot that they find Nueva Germania, this new German colony that was basically one of the testing sites for the Angulator, the quantum teleportation device, hidden away in the jungle. We had the Venice op with Bianchi. He's kind of the first suspect who's going to lead us through this chain of events. Denver outside the airport. That's another storyline maybe we'll get into next, where we kind of have a spy versus spy going on. And I really kind of like that as a side plot. We got the Czech Republic with the castle. One of our bad guys is in Serbia. Another one of our bad guys is in Turkey. A whole bunch of bad guys are in Croatia. And then some other bad guys in Bosnia and Slovenia. This is like Yugoslavia tour. This is like, I don't even know what was going on. We're in one country, another country. I don't know if Brad that month had just been vacationing, in the Balkans and Southeastern Europe, but he was all over the place with that. I was like, where are we? That's maybe the one biggest criticism I have is the chain of bad guys, who's contacting who's doing what and where, got a little bogged down because we were just traveling too heavy. Did you feel that way?
Yeah, and I felt like, we weren't really getting a sense of the area. We weren't getting those this book was short. Relative to some of the other ones. And I feel like, maybe we would have got a little bit more description of the setting if the book was a little bit longer. Until you told me that we were in Slovenia, Bosnia, I knew we were in Croatia, like Spiro, Croatia, but I remember that they mentioned the Istrian Peninsula. But yeah, I didn't realize we went to all these places because they mainly were just like, at the title things at the beginning of the chapter, like right. Bosnia, whatever, Tuesday.
Some of them, somebody just took a phone call. Like one of the bad guys just answers a phone call in one of these countries.
Sure.
And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, but, some of the highlights we got, like, the description of Venice was pretty cool. description of the
Yep.
Denver airport. We got a nice description of Spiro, and then obviously the Istrian Peninsula. So, he kind of like, while we were a lot of places, he sort of picked where he wanted to give us a little bit more description.
And I think a foil to that, moving around too much, was that we actually slowed down and really enjoyed the scenes in the woods, in the cabin, on the hiking trail with, boy, what were their names? Again, gets lost in the shuffle. So Victoria Suffolk,
Yes.
Vicky Suffolk, who thinks she's working for the Russians,
Mm-hmm.
her handler,
Peter,
who has a name. I think it was Peter Marcus.
Peter Marcus, yeah.
But that's an alias because he's actually Pence, which is Matthew's FBI partner, his like mentor. And Matthew is the guy that Victoria thinks she's running, and he thinks he's running her. So he's a double agent. I actually, as confusing as that sounds, it's even hard for me to explain it here. It was a really gripping spy versus spy little scene. And then again, because this is Brad Thor, you throw in the sex aspect of she's sleeping with both of them, her handler and her agent, or who she thinks is her agent. They've got some really bizarre stuff where she's being stalked in the woods and hides in this cabin, and it turns out they were role-playing. I was like, what is this, Vince Vaughn in the beginning of, what was that, Four Christmases?
Right.
Where they're at the bar?
Right.
But that was kind of cool when it was revealed that this was just a role play, and that was her handler / boyfriend, who was also running her. It's spy versus spy versus spy. Like, whoa, that was some deep stuff. Did you like all that?
I did to an extent. I like, part of me was like, what does this have anything to do with the actual novel?
And it's a good point.
It was tied in at the very end. You kind of knew that something was going to happen in the Denver airport, and I guess they were ultimately the amalgam. Right, so Pence is part of the amalgam,
right?
And obviously the amalgam has, and that's why I think George, this guy, the British MI6 guy, is also part of the amalgam. So like, there's these highly placed moles in different levels of intelligence agencies throughout the world, right?
Yeah.
Part of this cabal that wants to take down the world. And this is one of their plans. And I'm guessing, so correct me if I'm wrong, they were thinking that the government has an Angletor, like we already have an Angletor underneath the Denver airport. And they're hoping to send it to that Angletor, not the one in South America.
Exactly.
And then have it explode, and then set us back with all of our research, essentially, right?
Exactly. And whatever else we were doing in that facility. So it would just come off as a terrorist attack on an airport, but they'd secretly be destroying some of our really advanced technology and research on this quantum teleportation subject. So yeah, it's like they were going to hit us first and take down our capability to do or understand what they hit us with.
Right.
But to do that, Vicky Suffolk needed to have Matthew, who worked for the TSA, she thought, even though he was an FBI guy, plant these listening devices and get coordinates and know exactly, where the gate is that they needed to send the EMP bomb. So, yeah, it tied in enough for me. And I was along for the ride. I did like, kind of these dead drops in the woods, or finding each other on the hiking trails, or meeting up and trying to run the agent and then reporting to your handler about if you think the agent is where you need them to be. And I don't know, it was like kind of cool to have that old timey spy storyline going on in a Thor novel, because we don't always get that.
Yeah, no, I mean, don't get me wrong. It was interesting. It was cool. I didn't when I was reading, I didn't mind it, but I was at the very end, they sort of like brought it back in with like just, saying the word amalgam.
Yeah.
He's
a little
connected
clunky
this way. But yeah, I think this was, Scott or Brad, maybe, just trying something. There's never like this much sex, this much sexuality in one of his novels. Maybe he was told to spice things up a bit. I don't know. Maybe he wanted to. It was interesting to see the amount of, at times, did you feel like it was verging on an erotic thriller?
You know what? Maybe. And now that I think about it, perhaps, talking about the different criticism people have of this, perhaps this is a valid one, that a book with female protagonists and then a female side character, this Vicky Suffolk, basically you could reduce their importance in most of these ops down to sex appeal. And it's kind of interesting, right? Because that's part of the tactical advantage.
No, I think but I liked how he sort of brought it full circle in the very beginning by saying, this is why the Athena team works, because they're not suspected. They're, they are underestimated, but yet they're fucking badass operators who can hold their own, So
it's like Mitch Rapp at the farm on the training course, him holding back and only doing it 70% and then looking like he's winded. He wanted people to underestimate him, because then when he goes 100%, they're just blown to pieces. They lower their expectations of you. Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of Jack Carr, that's battlefield advantage, right? That's gaining a tactical advantage. If the enemy is going to play games like that, we need to be willing to do the same thing. And that's the whole point of the teams. And it works. It really does. But some part of me could validate someone who says, well, you're just reducing female operators to their use, through sex appeal. And I'm like, I mean, they also have the chops, right? They've got the skills to back it up. So I don't think that argument ultimately holds weight. We see them do enough badass stuff where, let's say the sex was cut out of this, they could still hold their own in any battle or fight. But the fact that they also can do that, I think, is really dangerous in a good way, dangerous for our enemies. So, yeah, I'm on board with it. Like I said, I was having fun. I'm just trying to tease out why some people might have a problem with this book.
Yeah, I mean, quantum teleportation is real. Like, we haven't gotten to this.
Are we going to have to cancel you again?
What do you mean?
You're telling me Wonka vision works?
No. I mean, yes, in the quantum realm, which is a real place. This
is a Cornell education right here, talking about the Wonka vision sending candy bars across the universe.
I don't think you'll ever be able to get that, but just in like 2021, I think the Chinese were able to send a photon. They were able to teleport it from China to a lower Earth orbit satellite.
Damn.
I don't know. I don't understand how they're able to detect that it's the exact same thing and it's actually traveling. I guess they could do calculations and realize that it traveled faster than physically possible. So I'm not a physicist.
I guess I just don't understand it. Yeah, right. I distinctly remember in like high school physics, I don't know, 11th, 12th grade or whatever, it was basically, you go through the whole year, or basically all high school, you learn science, physical science, earth science, biology, physics, and then eventually it's like, oh yeah, by the way, at the quantum level, none of this exists and is real. It's just, or you're doing like trajectories of something and you do all these fancy calculated equations. It's like, oh, a monkey is riding in a taxi at 50 miles an hour and shoots a bow and arrow at a 35-degree angle. Calculate how far ahead of the taxi the bow and arrow will land. And it's like, you do all these calculations and then the teacher goes, oh yeah, by the way, wind resistance. None of this is true. It doesn't actually work this way.
Yeah, no, you learn physics, in a very basic sense, and like anything you would want to do, use it for. It's like, yeah, you're not taking into any account of any other.
It's like maybe in a vacuum.
Any other variable. And it's all in a vacuum. All in a vacuum.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah, I don't understand the quantum stuff.
All right, we need to thank our patrons, our special operator Sherry F, our special agents Daryl, Kevin, George, Matt, Ben, Matt, Dawn, Peggy, Ray, Bridget, and Mark. Please subscribe, rate, and review to all 3 seasons of No Limits using Apple Podcast or Spotify. You can find us online at thrillerpod.com or on Twitter and Instagram at thrillerpodcast. And as always, let Athena be Athena.